Hi, welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns from the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
We are back in action. Each week, I love the chance to get back together with Doug and team up to talk to a leader in the field, typically someone leading an institution or a system, and trying to understand what it's like to lead in this particular moment. We want to unpack lessons from how they became a leader, the leader that they are, what inspires them, and helps us all just get a little bit of professional development, a little bit of insight and perspective and wisdom to start out the week. So that's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
Today, we're joined by Javier Reyes, who is Interim Chancellor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He's been in that role since the summer. He had joined UIC as provost about a year earlier. And we're going to talk a little bit about the interim role and preparation for what comes might be ahead for him and how higher ed should look at provost interim role. So, Bridget, back to you.
Welcome, Chancellor Reyes. So excited to get a chance to learn from you today. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Bridget. Doug, it's a pleasure to be with you and your audience, so I really appreciate it.
So you're in a really challenging position. It's an incredible opportunity because you get a chance to try on the Chancellor role. But I just want to roll the tape back on what Doug just described, that you have been, that you've only been at UIC for about a year in the midst of COVID. And then all of a sudden you have to actually be the person leading. I would love for you to take us back to when you hear this news and you had this opportunity, and it is an opportunity, but I'm sure it's very overwhelming. How did you think about it at first?
Well, I think I have to be honest, Bridget. When I go back to that moment, it was definitely I could feel the ground shaking. It was definitely something that hit me hard. Saying I've been here 6 months. Chancellor Emeritus is leaving for South Carolina. 3 months of trying to figure out what the president of the system was going to do. Eventually decided that I could take on the interim position. And at that time, I really thought this is going to be a team effort, right? This is going to be working with the cabinet, making sure that we are leading the university forward together. A national search was launched for the chancellorship, so it was definitely something that we know is going to be on a timeline. So my idea at that moment was we're going to be a strong team, and we're going to be leading the university as a we, not necessarily as an I. So that was the first approach. It was a little bit different.
Tell us a little bit about how that might have been surprising and walk us through that.
Well, I think, as you know, the world keeps spinning, situations keep emerging, either in our facilities, with our students, with our faculty, with our budgets. And although we definitely have the discussions as a we, eventually a decision has to be made. And that decision has to be carried in the shoulders of the chancellor. And I quickly realized that I can have a lot of conversations, I can have a lot of input, but at the end of the day, the decision will be mine, and the responsibility of it will be on my office, will be on my shoulders. And that quickly changed from managing as a team, yes, but the decisions at the end do have to have one individual.
It's interesting. What are the implications of that sort of realization you had and of that reality for collaboration among senior teams? I mean, I assume it doesn't make it a lie to talk about teamwork as a senior team, but it does, as you suggest, mean that ultimately, one person has to rise above and be both the person to make the decision and the one to get a lot of the blowback. But so how do you think about what does that say to you about how one as a leader collects information, opinions, et cetera, and what are the limits of that?
Well, I think that the most important thing was to never close the door to hearing everybody else's opinion, providing that context. That was a commitment that I had with the team to really try to gather all the information together, but then knowing that not everybody will agree. And that is the tricky part. How do you manage a situation to maintain the collegiality in a team that might be in a temporary structure, to not just disconnect, right? Just because you disagree on a couple of the things, how do you keep them all at the table? And that was sort of I always set the ground rules with my teams that what happens in the meeting stays in the meeting. We lead as a group, and we have one decision is made, and we all get behind that. And I think the team, the cabinet, the vice chancellors have been very respectful of that approach, saying, yes, in the end, a decision will be made, but how we got to it, it stays within the room. And making sure that that's the case, because in a temporary team, if you lose that, then people could just disconnect and just wait you out in a way. And that would really, really make the university slow down and hurt the institution.
So I'm super curious that you've only been at UIC for 1 year again, but you're also, it's right on the tail, like in the transition of COVID. So I don't even know if you've been in person much in fall of 21, enough to build trust and rapport and relationships and kind of your eyes and ears as a leader on campus as provost. And then all of a sudden you're forced into this very different reality, which if I'm recalling correctly, Chancellor Amarides, he announces his news in January, I think of.
Yes.
So you've been there 6 months and you hear this. And I am just curious about, did you already feel like you had found a way to create your own kitchen cabinet, or did you have to try and do that in the midst of everyone knowing you were about to take on this role? Like, I'm just your own personal cabinet for advice and the people you really trust.
Well, I was forming my cabinet, and there were some structural changes that we wanted to do in the provost level position with how we were aligning our student success initiatives and working with enrollment management. And so that I was going through that, but I had taken the time to at least be present, perhaps not face to face, but really trying to be online with meeting with the faculty, meeting with the department chairs, meeting with the deans, meeting open venues with faculty members and even the staff members. So I had at the time been able to be in front of people. I don't know if I had enough time to build trust as one would like to have it. But I think that was the most important thing come January, to say, okay, what are the things that, irrespective of who was chancellor, who was provost, needed to move in the institution based on my 6 months evaluation the semester before, and make sure that I had the time to move them forward. That's when I said, when I was asked to be the interim chancellor, I immediately asked the president to allow me to get Provost Colley, Karen Colley, to become the interim provost. She had been the provost interim when they were doing the search for the provost. She had the trust, she had the knowledge base, she had the understanding, and I needed to make sure that I would reflect on the campus that I was going to have a provost that I could work with, but that they could work with as well. And that's how I sort of solidified my position with the campus of saying, let me bring someone that everybody trusts on both sides. I trust her, you trust her. She's going to keep us moving forward.
So apart from what you already mentioned about sort of the realization of the kind of singleness of being the decision maker, what else has if not surprised you, really struck you about the chancellorship, the role of the chancellor compared to what you had done before?
Yeah, if you could just frame it, I would just want to add one thing is, think about other provosts and what they don't understand about their boss's job. I think that this, we don't give enough understanding of it's really like. So you're one of the few people who can understand that and go back to the other jobs. So I'm just curious, if you were to coach other provosts, how would you describe that's in the surprising elements in that framework?
I would say that what I have learned is that the vice chancellors, the other vice chancellors, as we know, provosts are vice chancellors, vice presidents as well, but the other vice presidents and vice chancellors have really large plates on their table as well. And I didn't realize how much of this academic affairs and the student affairs in their learning environment, the research environment, are actually on their plate as well to support. From our facilities, from administration, the vice chancellor for research, how much Dr. Groden here understands and supports our deans, our faculty, and how can I be a provost that is actually more supportive of their efforts. And I wanted to, as I go back to being the provost, I want to take one good practice with me, which is I want to meet with the vice chancellors more often. I want to understand from their perspective, how can I be helpful? I want to keep that momentum of conversation going, not because I was the chancellor, but because I am the provost, and I know how, at the end of the day, we're all here for the students, our research, our community of services, but how can I make sure that their priorities, which in many cases will help fuel the outcome of the students and our research and our outreach, are actually well aligned with what I think are my priorities, so that I can give them the first priority in some cases, or sometimes really try to push for some that are complementary for the student affairs and academic affairs. So that's what I would say, that I can be a much better provost now after taking on this position, because I have gained some understanding, even of the chancellors. We always say, and I was one, I said, well, the chancellors are like the deans and the provosts are like the associate deans. And it's true, in practice, the scope is a lot larger. It's a lot larger. And therefore, the demands, sometimes when a chancellor comes back to a campus and calls a dean, hey, help me with this, and a provost is like, why didn't you call me first? Why didn't you come ask me first? It's the speed at which they have to respond to sometimes legislators, sometimes our alumni, sometimes our corporate partners, our community. It's sometimes not conducive of taking the whole academic approach and steps. And I think I can be a much better partner with the next chancellor, because I know the demands that come on their time. I know the requests that come from the outside, and I can help them channel them and help my deans as well as my vice provost be sometimes more responsive of what this is coming, and then close the loop with me as provost, but make sure that they understand that there's a sense of urgency that comes from the chancellor's office that in many cases is at a different speed than when it comes from the academic affairs side.
What can I ask? What the sort of building off what Bridget said before, you essentially got into a chancellor role presumably well before you expected to. I don't know. I'll be interested at how it sort of shapes your view of whether that is an ultimate goal for you to get back to that role. But what kinds of training or preparation should we be giving provosts who do potentially want to or could be good leaders of institutions that they maybe aren't getting now?
I would say that one of the things that I would do, that I did as a dean at some point, as vice provost as another, is perhaps give some of the team members a chance to shadow in some meetings, in some part of the job. These trips that I have done now as interim chancellor to go visit the congressional delegation in DC and sit in front of Representative Davis and talk to him and his team, I think would be sometimes very beneficial to hear as provost, and perhaps as others vice chancellors. I think sharing a little bit of come join me in this conversation, I think it's something that you see in other programs where you can shadow a leader. And sometimes I do believe that if you come from other institutions, it's easier to understand that different institutions are different from each other. But being able to, as you have in some of the ACE initiatives and programming, to be able to go and shadow another leader at that level, I think it's very valuable. I would be better prepared when something that happens on our campus gets the governor to call the campus, to call the president. The president calls me and says, hey, what are your thoughts? I would be better prepared to know what is the reaction time. I would say another one, understanding the whole dynamics of as simple as deferred maintenance. The academic affairs is incredible infrastructure for our research, our teaching, but the deferred maintenance of the cost of it, how you manage it, not only when it comes to our classrooms and our labs, but also our dining facilities, our residence halls. If you have a hospital and a college of medicine like we do, it adds an important dynamic and dimension to a job that it's hard to sometimes visualize it. So having more shadow the budget officer of the university, a CFO, sit down with the lawyers. I mean, I've been in conversations that I would have never dreamed or perhaps sometimes wanted to be part of. So having more of those programs that are like, go work with legal, go work with HR, go work with the budget, get outside of academic affairs for provosts, I think would be very, very helpful. Perhaps for other vice chancellors as well.
I think that's really great. And especially as I think about, I did an ACE fellowship. It was a very profound experience, but not enough people get that opportunity because it is expensive and you have to be able to essentially walk away from your current job for a year. I hadn't thought about how we really as a sector need to push for more of that, because too often in our careers, we are very self-referential and we know what we know. And it makes and often when we think about professional development and things like that, we think about what it does to the individual. But what you brought forward is how much better a player for the team you will be, how much better you will be in the cabinet, more self-aware of things that like the blind spots. I mean, one of the things that is like the most profound experience you can have during an ACE fellowship is if you can go to one of the big university with a D1 sports team on game day and follow the security team around, the lead of the security, and being able to see just how complex of incredibly intricate operation is happening and nobody even knows about it, right? Like little things like that again are saved only for certain people who get that opportunity. But I think that's a really important point, that we would be a better sector, we'd be better colleagues if we had more of this empathy generating kind of development.
And I have to tell you, one of the things that, I think the provost positions and vice chancellor of academic affairs many times will come from the faculty. So your experience, I mean, I'm an economist. I was never trained on HR matters. I was never trained on sometimes public relations matters. I may have had good experiences first at Arkansas, then at West Virginia, now here, but that have allowed me. But sometimes you don't get to work on how the issue of debt and how you're going to do your bonds rating as an institution if you're an academic. So these experiences, I think, would be very, very purposeful to open the eyes of. That's why you have to trust your vice chancellors. That's why you have to have a good relationship with them, because they're good at what they do and they can help you understand it better. So I think it's an important aspect of sometimes the internship I'm going through at the moment.
It's a paid internship, but
yes.
It's mainly in difficult experiences and hard decisions.
Yes.
Doug, I was going to ask if, Javier, I don't know if you feel like you were given direction when you became interim, but I was just thinking we could zoom back out for people in the audience that, which by the way, Javier, you've already gotten good comments from friends in the audience. But I just, this idea of, when you become an interim, do you feel like you were given marching orders of what the mandate of being an interim is? Because I think you think that it's just like, hold the line perhaps, or just keep things as they are. But depending on how your institution was left, you could be healing. It could be trying to move forward. I've seen interims at my own institutions that have actually been able to accelerate change during that period. So I'm just curious, do you feel like there was a mandate given, or if there's one that you could clarify for people thinking about the role?
And just one thing I would add, there are frequently times where the interim may be a candidate or may not, or is clearly not a candidate and it seems like in your situation, it was pretty clearly determined that you weren't going to be a candidate. Is that fair? Or I don't know.
It was not completely determined.
Okay.
That evolved through the search.
Got it.
But I can tell you that there was perhaps not a mandate, but there were so many projects in motion. This idea of Michael leaving at that time, it's not something that was on the horizon. It's something that happened perhaps quickly, as he well put it. But we were doing a budget redesign. We're doing a complete reorganization and reimagination of our student enrollment services, retention services, student success units. We wanted to reimagine how we were sort of working with our Office of Access and Diversity and Academic Affairs and all the different components of what has been surrounding higher ed over the past 2 or 3 years. And I think that was the mandate from the president, as well as from other mentors that knew that I was considering being the interim. They said, if you're going to do this, don't be the interim, be the chancellor. Your institutions need you to be a chancellor that will continue to make decisions. And that was perhaps the naive part and experienced part of me saying, well, yeah, we're going to do it as a we. At the end of the day, there was a decision to be made and I have to carry it. So the mandate was, don't stop, continue moving forward. There's important initiatives that you started as provost that were supported by the chancellor, continue to support them. Initiatives that Chancellor Ramirez started that have not been finalized, that you cannot just wait until the next chancellor comes along to keep them moving. It's just 12 months will be an eternity in higher ed. So keep moving. And that was something that I heard from my mentors. I heard from President Kalin. I heard from Chancellor Amirides. They say, be the chancellor. Don't be an interim. Make the decisions. And that was, I would say, the mandate. I did learn something that I would share with anyone who's considering being a president or a chancellor. When you ask, would this be something you do in the future? I think there's definitely something that I would do in the future. But I now understand better how 2 or 3 chancellors, including Chancellor Gerhardt back at Arkansas a few years back, said in one of the leadership meetings that he will hold at the time, that he said, look, this is a lifetime. This is a lifestyle. This is a lifestyle that you have to have when you're a chancellor. The same thing was repeated by Michael Amirides. The same thing was repeated by President Gui. The same thing has repeated now by President Kalin. And I didn't understand what they meant at the time. Now I do. This job requires complete focus and attention for the institution. You're the first one that will sacrifice a vacation, a birthday, and you shouldn't, but sometimes you have to. Sometimes the demands require it. And it requires you that you make this, going to your events, going travel, meeting with the constituencies, being a voice for your campus, connecting with your faculty. It's not the job. It is a lifestyle.
Do you think that's really well said, and I think something that people in significant positions at really top positions, really at a lot of organizations probably feel. Do you think it has to be that way? And do you think that is going to increasingly become something of a limiter for who is willing to step into those roles?
I think the more we make, the more we provide people access to what this lifestyle is, what this job entails, the more you will be having people that come in completely knowing they want to immerse themselves and give themselves to an institution, right? The more we don't do this, then you may have more people that's like, you know what? I mean, there's some things that I'm willing to not willing to do. And sometimes the institution will demand 24 hours, 7 days a week. Sometimes you'll be able to take time off. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you get time off. But there are times in which the tables change, a crisis emerges, something happens on your campus, something happens to a faculty member, something happens to a student, the world keeps spinning and you can't stop. You have to spin with it. So the more we give this perspective to people that it has more than you lead the institution and you have to be the one that is there most, if not all the time. It's important.
Yeah. I mean, it's 100% true. I just wish that there was more context like that provided every year when the Chronicle releases the salary list, because there's such attacking and looking at this position from an insular one single perspective, which is the money paid. And I'm not out here saying, everyone should be getting billions and millions of dollars, but I have seen the amount of sacrifice. And I do think that a little bit more context around this is like often not just a person, often there's also an unpaid, if there is a partner or spouse, there are massive expectations for that unpaid position. There are all kinds of challenges that don't ever see the light of day. It would just be helpful to have a little bit more nuance when we talk about the role. Yeah. So
I wish sometimes with the responsibility of that comes the size of the institution, right? I mean, if we could present the context of number of colleges, number of students, number of faculty, number of staff, the budget size. It's like small universities like UIC are like small cities. And there's definitely a responsibility that keeps you up at night in many cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we appreciate you being willing to make that sacrifice and your leadership. I want to just shift to our last few rapid fire questions. So the first is, and you've kind of hinted at this a little bit about being the interim, but I'm wondering if you have different advice that is the best advice that it's like a touchstone for you that's helped you in your career. Who gave it and what was it?
Well, it was given to me by Dan Worrell, who was the dean at the Walton College at the University of Arkansas. And when I became an associate dean, he said, make sure that you ask everyone in your teams, in your groups, if you're doing something wrong. When you're in a meeting, open yourself to ask them, am I doing something wrong? Because if you lead by that example, that you can have constructive criticism given to you, then when you give it back, it will be understood that it is not a one-way street. And he said, and to do that, you have to put your listening ears on when you ask that question. You really have to listen, and I think that has been a great advice that I have used even today when I meet with my staff, even with the chancellor and the provost before. I would ask them after a long meeting, so tell me something I'm doing wrong in front of everyone, and open myself to that criticism, a constructive feedback that it's done in a professional way, it's reacted in a professional way, and that really then you act on it. And it starts creating a culture that it's okay to say when something's wrong, it's okay to say it. And that has been, I would say, the biggest advice that I have had, and I use it every day.
That's great. And I've learned something similar, and that is 100% true. And how you talk about it, and that in the future, as you're working on that thing, whatever it is, drawing back to, and this is because so-and-so was generous enough to give me the feedback, because what people don't recognize sometimes is that feedback is the most generous and vulnerable thing that someone can do, especially if there's a power dynamic. Like making sure that you're validating and you're constantly reminding people, hey, remember I got this feedback, I'm working on this skill. See, because we're learning here. We're a learning organization. We're not afraid of failure. We're not assuming that we know everything. I think that's really powerful. Is there advice that you give to people who are earlier in their careers that's different than that? Do you have anything else that you like consistently find yourself referencing?
Well, I always tell them to when they're in meetings, not to listen only to the person that is talking, but also try to look at the person that is providing that feedback. And I always tell my team to talk to each other about what they saw in that meeting. Sometimes we hear different things in a meeting. So to check with others when a meeting just happened, a project is ongoing, check with others. Hey, I heard that I should be working on this, or I heard that this is where we're going. What did you hear? Just to see if we are all on the same page. And we didn't have we all have our own filters, and you tend to change the message. So that I always invite also people to say, hey, and write it down to see if we're all on the same page. So that's a different advice that I give people.
Is there one book that you find yourself recommending to people around leadership the most?
The one that and it's now an older edition, but there's a new one coming out. But there's the Speed of Trust. To me,
that's such a good one.
Yeah, that's the one, and I think now there's a new one that has come out by Kobe as well. That it's Trust and Inspire. So it's coming out. It just came out, I think, this year. So I want to read that one. But the Speed of Trust, and the other one that I sometimes like all these books is in my book, but it's Your Ship. It's another one that I really enjoyed by Captain Abrashaf, about the best ship in the Navy and how they got to be the best ship in the Navy. It has a lot to do with the Speed of Trust as well. So those two have been the ones that I love, and I always compare new ones to those two to see if they're building on that. Oh, you're muted, Bridget.
Well, we really appreciate you spending this time with us today. This has been really helpful. And now we have a new book to read. And I'm just very excited to have gotten a chance to have this conversation about interims and how we support them. So thank you, Chancellor Reyes. Thank you, Doug. And we will see you all next week.
Thank you, everyone.